welcome everybody. What I'd like to do now is just do the welcome to the regular Future Trends Forum. Just a quick show of hands. Those of you who are physically on the physical plane with us here in the room, how many of you have participated in the Future Trends Forum? That you've watched it or? Excellent. Welcome all of you. How many of you have no idea what we're talking about? Well, I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're here. So my name is Brian Alexander. I'm the creator, host, and chief cat herder for the Future Trends Forum. And today we have a really, really unusual session. Now, what those of you who are here in the room can see, this is how the forum normally looks. That's the on-screen experience. It's a weekly video conference where we discuss the fate of education and technology. With me is my good friend Michael Johnson, who is a publisher, a consultant, a podcaster, a writer, a guru, and also possessed of a beard. You see, the original title for this session was called Between Two Beards. And this didn't go over quite as well as we thought, so we've changed the title to The Pragmatist and the Futurist, and you can figure out which is which pretty soon. But let's begin just by quickly introducing the forum. And again, at 4:15, we'll begin the formal session itself. So if we can advance to the next slide, please. It's a dramatic moment of pause. So if you don't know the forum, this is a discussion-based platform that spun out of a continuously published regular trends analysis called the Future Trends in Technology and Education Report, or FTTE. That's been running for about 6 years, and that's a monthly trends analysis that takes a look at the major trends that are reshaping education and technology. We've been following some of these trends for a long time, about 86 or 90 of them, so we have a pretty good longitudinal sense of which trends are strong and which trends are weak. We have a lot of data backing this up. If you're curious, go to ftte.us and you could find out more. You can download some sample issues. The November issue is coming up in just a few days. And we use on Twitter the hashtag FTTE for discussion. Now that's a publication. This forum, instead, is kind of the opposite. This is discussion-based. It's conversation-based. This handful of slides we have will go away in just a few minutes, and we'll be focusing on conversation and discussion. So the next slide, please. Now, altogether, the forum, the FTT report, are part of a larger project called the Future of Education Observatory. If you haven't seen that, you can go to futureofeducation.us and learn more. That's a multimedia, open, participatory, and ongoing exploration of the future of education. This includes the FTTE report, it includes the Future Trends Forum, it includes a book club, it includes a blog. There's more stuff coming up for it right now. So it's probably an unusual and possibly unique structure out there in the world. I'd love to hear what you think when you get a chance. Next slide, please. Now, before we go further, we'd like to thank the people who helped make this work possible. And we'll begin by talking with some of our sponsors. So to begin with, NYSERNet in New York State. And we have a representative from that fine organization here. Hello, Larry. NYSERNet is a nonprofit that helps get that state's fine colleges and universities on broadband internet. They do a lot of terrific work. We're glad to see them here, and we're really, really grateful to them for their support. We're also grateful to Shindig because, as you can tell, Shindig makes available this technology that we're using right now. So this is going to be fun. To try and explain this, I'm going to explain this for both the people who are on the video right now as well as those who are in the room. So if you this is a video conferencing platform, and you might be familiar with other ones like, say, Google Hangout or Zoom. This has some similarities, but some key differences. At the very top of the screen, you can see two panels. One is the video, which has me in it talking about it, which gets kind of self-referential after a while. And next to that is a slide. That's called the stage. Everybody can see and hear everything that goes on the stage. Below that, you can see different icons right now, different people, and moving around a little bit. And that's the participant space. Each one of those represents a single person or a login from somewhere in the world. And you can see them moving around back and forth. I mean, think of it as a physical audience room. And if you're in that space right now, if you like to talk to somebody privately, you can just click on their icon. And if they want to talk to you and their mic and camera are working, your two icons will click together like Legos, and you have your own private audiovisual conversation, which is a pretty handy thing to have. It's just like being here in the room and leaning next to somebody and whispering to them. Now, there are a lot of ways to communicate and participate in this, which is what makes it a bit different from other platforms as well. If you can see on the screen, those of you who are in the room, can you see that white strip on the bottom? that has a few different options. And if you click on them, they give you some different ways to contribute and participate. So one of them, on the far left, you can see what looks like a few human silhouettes and a number. If you click on that, up pops a chat box, and you can just have a basic text chat with the 18 or so people who have come in with you. There's also a little film strip option so you can see people's silhouettes and their information as they come in. If you're just coming in, by the way, right now, the program officially starts at 4:15. So if you're here in the physical environment, you're fine, relax. If this sounds pompous and formal, believe me, it'll relax pretty soon. I'm explaining this for everybody who's online. And you can, of course, listen right now as well. On that white strip, the second from the left is a question mark. So people can click on that. And if they do, they get a little box where they can type in a question or a comment. So if you'd like to type in a question and say, do you have to have a beard in order to appear in the future Transform? That's a good question. That's a good question. And then you type that up. And what happens is we can then flash that in the screen so everyone can see it. And then I read it out loud so everyone can hear it. And the great thing is, right next to that, on that white strip, you'll see a raised hand button. If you click that, that tells us that you want to join us here on stage. On stage, you can see 2 pods right now. The one that I'm waving in and the slide. Actually, 4 different pods can be there. So we can have a kind of panel at any given time. So, you click the raised hand button for video. You click the question mark for chat. You click the other button for the chat room. All these kind of ways to appeal. All these ways to connect. And there's one more on top of it, which isn't on the screen. Let me just ask the room quickly. How many of you are on Twitter? Oh, great. How many of you are on Twitter right now? I see people typing. So, excellent. I need to keep checking this. So please, if you'd like to tweet at us, I'm Brian Alexander, one word. Are you using your Twitter account now? Yes. What's your Twitter handle?
MFJ Speaker.
MFJ Speaker is the other Twitter account. So the other thing you can do is simply use the hashtag FTTE. And we'd be glad to hear from you. In fact, we'll track that during this conversation. So these are all kinds of ways to participate. I think this is an unusual and very powerful environment, and we're very grateful to Shindig for making it possible. Now let's go over to one more slide because we have one more population to thank, and then we can get ready to go. I'd like to thank our supporters on Patreon. So just a quick show of hands. Are any of my Patreon supporters in the room now? Okay, it's a bit like Ouija. Is there anybody here who wants to contact us from beyond the grave? If you haven't seen it, Patreon is like Kickstarter or GoFundMe. It's a crowdfunding site, and people fund people. There are a whole bunch of people who contribute more than that, some wonderful folks, and we're really grateful to them for all their support. And we'd love you to join them if you can. So, next slide. That's who powers all of this. That's where this comes from. That's how the technology works. What we're going to be doing today is a little unusual. Normally, the way the forum works is there's usually a wonderful guest, which we have this time, and we have a host, which is me, and then we have between 40 and about 180 people online. It's done remotely every time. But now we have a live session, so we get to combine all of that with you here in the room in Denver, Colorado. So we're going to have a few questions to start off with, but we would love to take questions from those of you in the room. And those of you who are online, of course, we'd love to hear your questions using all those different technologies. Now, we're not scheduled to start for another 4 minutes. So I'd like to ask those who are in the room virtually, if you could just use the chat box to introduce yourselves, that would be good. And those of you who are in the room physically, let me just say a couple of words about my fine guest. Michael Johnson here is a publisher. He's a guru in business design and business operations. He has focused a great deal of his life in education, including publishing, everything from textbooks to OER. He's also a podcaster. He's also a publisher and an author who has a book on cricket and a podcast about improving businesses, which I strongly recommend. Again, also, he has a beard, which makes him very powerful. So we're going to be discussing today, and a ponytail. See, we're going to be discussing a whole variety of issues under the rubric of pragmatism and futurism, looking ahead to where higher education and technology are going. So, actually, I'm wondering if we should just start. I think there's a lot of people here. I mean, there's a lot of people online. So which question should we start with? Did you have a preference, or should I just?
I don't have a preference.
Okay.
No. Yeah, my mic's not on.
Really?
Hello?
No?
Good? There we go. Outstanding.
Excellent.
Thank you, Chris.
Excellent. So one question to think about is, what are some of the new business models for higher education going forward? So why don't you mention a few of them and we'll bat this back and forth.
Right. So one we've been of interest in the last few weeks is this idea that students would position themselves where organizations, corporations, or foundations would sort of bet on the students' future earning success. The cost of their education would be paid for as they were getting educated, and then once they got out into the world, as they say, some percentage of their earnings would be paid back to those who funded the education.
Income-based repayment.
Income-based, yeah.
Now, what do you think about that?
So I think it's an interesting alternative. I think when it gets to that stake where you have to sort of sell your potential to people, it demonstrates very clearly that anything going on now is not working, or everything going on now is not working when people are willing to return back to basically indentured servitude type of methodologies to get their educations paid for.
Let me just, if I can ask both, oh, this is great. This is actually a pretty sensitive mic. Yes, I don't have to masticate it to make it work. Let me just ask those of you who are in the room physically, as well, virtual call, how many of you are in states that are considering income-based repayment plans, or are institutions that are considering that? Anybody? Yeah, where are you?
Right.
That's a different plan.
We can have a cricket conversation later.
And how's that working out?
The government's just lowered the threshold, so you have to start paying back your debt as your income grows sooner.
That must have made a lot of people very happy. Yeah, I bet. Oregon is considering this. And I would just add, as one business model, it has a few challenges. One is that it loads the dice in favor of careers and majors that are more likely to get paid. So you're more likely to invest in a petroleum engineer student than you are in, say, an English major. And that just, that seems likely, and that could have pretty negative effects, I think. Please. So you don't have a lot of female petroleum engineers, but you do have a lot of female English majors. Yes. And if you start with gender inequality and compensation to begin with, good point.
Yeah. And your comment there about if the gambler, the person who's going to put the money up, whether it's the national government or a state or an institution or whatever, if they would lean more towards the higher paid careers, then that makes sense from a financial standpoint.
Could you bring yours a little closer?
Okay.
Oh.
Is that better or worse? It's louder, but is it better or worse? So this idea that these types of degrees will have higher wages, so people are more likely to bet on those, then brings up the other ugly question, which is, should all the degrees cost the same amount for the student?
That's a serious problem, because it costs the institution different amounts of money in order to be able to fund different degrees. So if we're going to take this gentleman here and we're going to put him through a cell microbiology program, it's going to be relatively costly. Whereas if we put the gentleman behind him through a nice philosophy program, it'll cost nothing in comparison. So that's an interesting problem. And then does that then incentivize the universities to start charging people more? And that's a real issue. I think one of the big problems we have is that higher education in the United States, as well as elsewhere, is simply getting more expensive to offer. Even though we have cost-cutting measures all over the place, including switching our faculty from tenure to adjuncthood, still higher education is very expensive. And as we try to get more and more students who are first-generation college students who have special needs at times, it's not going to get any cheaper, especially as we expand the numbers of students. We don't have a way of really scaling that up. So higher education gets more and more expensive. At the same time, state governments are giving less and less at a per-student basis. I'm frankly very concerned about the business model for American higher education.
And you need to be. I live in Wisconsin, and we had been very long and well known for significant investments in education of all types.
The Wisconsin dream.
And I would just gently say that is not exactly the case today.
No. Maybe next week, if you fire Scott Walker, it'll be different.
We have an education man running against him, so we'll see.
But I live in one of the bluest states in the country. I live in Vermont, and we are either 49th or 50th in the country in supporting public higher education. Our community college costs between $4,000 and $5,000 a semester, for example. So this is a serious challenge. Do you think we're going to, as a result, Do you think we're going to either keep seeing the published tuition price continue to accelerate and accelerate further and further, or do you think we'll see colleges come up with some way of somehow saving costs that we haven't quite yet discovered?
Well, I think the first is certainly true. However, it's gotten to the point now where the published tuition price has basically become what the car sticker price used to be. It's just an opener for negotiations on rebates, refunds, tuition abatement, whatever these things happen to be. So it's more of a starting point than anything even approaching a serious number. I don't think that conversation around, well, it would normally be $60,000 a year, but for you, let me talk to my manager. For you,
get extra radial tires.
It's only going to be $38,000. But if you get the underwash, whatever. And so I think there needs to be some transparency and some legitimacy in what the price is. The price should be the price. How you pay for it, we can have other conversations about that. There's all sorts of programs around those things. But
right now, we're about as transparent as healthcare.
Yes.
Come in, we're going to remove your gallbladder, and we'll tell you the price when it's done.
That's right.
Right.
Tell your insurance company first.
That's right. As the futurist in the panel here, one of the things that really worries me is that as the United States and also Australia, Canada, and the UK are experiencing increasing economic inequality, what we do is we charge the wealthiest students the full freight, and they then supplement everybody else's income in a sense. What worries me about this is, A, that it's not sustainable for a given institution. Let me just ask, if you know your institution's discount rate, do you know if it's higher than 40%? Just show your hand if it is. Wow. How high is it? Do you know?
50.
52. Wow. And someone else had a hand up? Yeah, what? Right. Right. Yep. Right. Quite. I'll repeat it back. I'll repeat it back. It's a question. The published price then becomes a question of symbolic value. So the higher that published sticker price becomes, the more valuable that education is perceived to be. And I don't know. I'm sorry. What's your name? Oh, which one? Excellent. Exactly. And so the question is, if you couldn't hear that the discount rate only matters as a problem if you can't meet your net revenue gains, which is the problem that we're facing. In part, one of the largest challenges that we're facing throughout the developed world is that we're producing fewer and fewer kids. The number of kids, aged K through 12 population is continuing to shrink. In the United States, it's uneven. Different states, Texas, for some reason, is actually growing kids. I'm not quite sure how they do it, but good for them. But if you look at the entire Northeast, the entire Midwest, almost all of the South, chunks of the West Coast, we're simply producing fewer and fewer kids, and our median age is shooting up, which is a wonderful story for all kinds of reasons. I mean, it means that women are more educated. We know the more education women have, the fewer kids they have in life. It also means that our medical capacity is tremendous, that our science and technology is terrific, that public health is excellent. I mean, it's a great story. It's a wonderful success story. But when it comes to higher education, it means that our traditional age population of those 18 to 22-year-olds is shrinking. Now, we had a solution. We had a great solution for about 15 years, and it worked until last year. That solution was to go abroad and to import students from East Asia in particular and Central Asia. And that worked great until the Trump administration. Whatever you think of the politics, I'm just going to throw that aside, the number of international students has declined over the past 2 years. So we have this problem. How do we fund this? My question for my colleague here is, what happens next? Do we start closing schools? Do we start merging schools? Or do we do something new and reinventive?
So hopefully hopefully it's not closing schools, but I think the other two are excellent examples. And again, going back to my home state of Wisconsin, we had a sort of blending exercise where some of the smaller satellite campuses and what would be typically referred to as community colleges or 2 years were folded up into their geographically closest university branch. Jury's still out on that. Sure. It's very unusual for people to tell me to be more quiet, or more loud, rather. So I was just talking about how they blend
better?
things together in Wisconsin. What's happened in the last few years, where there is this sort of molding and merging based on geographic proximity from our 2-year programs into our university programs.
Into your 4 years.
Yeah,
and the public universities.
Yes, just the publics. Yeah,
right.
And there's another interesting anomaly, and I don't know what to make of it other than to mention it in this setting. We have, I believe it was New York University, which decided they weren't going to charge for med school anymore. Mm-hmm. So you talk about cost of instruction, astronomical.
Right.
Med school, right? And earning potential, also gigantic. And for whatever their reasons, I don't understand the business reasons that were explained to me when I asked about it. But you get an institution like that, highly respected,
yes,
high dollar institution, saying, "Yep, you know what? We don't want our students thinking about that. It's just going to be free."
Now, how do they pay for this? How do they pay for this?
Like I said, the business explanation I got, I have been unable to decipher, but I continue to work on it.
Well, one way is to get gifts from the very wealthiest people.
Sure, gifts and donors. And if that were true, then all the Ivies would be free because you know the size of their endowments and things like that. So the thing about, from the business side, when you look at an institution, and I'm going to come back to a particular example about the bookstores in a minute, but when you look at the institution, it's very rarely viewed as we would view things in the business world, where like, okay, you have incoming, you have outgoing, and if incoming is bigger, yay. If outgoing is bigger, boo. And then you look at the numbers inside and you adjust accordingly, and then do a little flavor to taste, whatever that happens to mean with your particular employee based or students served. It doesn't go on, at least and it's only 33 years for me, so I'm just kind of getting warmed up, but it just doesn't go on in the university marketplace.
Well, we're starting to see one trace of that. I'm wondering, anybody in the audience, has your institution gone through an academic program prioritization exercise? I'm seeing a few nods, and people look like they've been punched around the head and shoulders. If you haven't seen this, this is an exercise where the university faculty, along with the staff, but primarily the faculty, go through the academic programs with data. You know, how many programs enroll, how many students, how many majors, how many minors, and so on, and then hash this out to see which programs, which departments enroll the most students, get the most bang for the buck, and which ones don't. And then once you make that determination, then you can alter resources back and forth a bit. So it turns out that that wonderful Russian language program actually has one major every 10 years, whereas your cell microbiology program is just really flushed with students. And once you do that, then you can say, hire more people. So in many ways, I'm describing this as neutrally as possible. There's a wonderful consultant named Dickinson who has a whole method for doing this. But I mention this because one of the outcomes that can happen is to close a program or to close a major. And if you do that, you can remove tenured faculty without declaring financial exigency. The nickname I've come up with this for a while is called the Queen's Sacrifice, because when you play chess, you can give up the queen, your most powerful piece, in a desperate measure to try and win the game. In many ways, faculty are the queen piece in American higher education chess. They're the ones with governance. They're the ones that teach, that do research. And to give them up is a major sacrifice. And I've been tracking this, and it's been happening at dozens of colleges and universities across the U.S. So that is one way of, what's the euphemism, right-sizing the labor force?
Yeah, that is one of the euphemisms. There's others. But as the pragmatist, I don't like it when non-business educated people, I'm not talking about you went to business school, I'm just talking about if you didn't grow up in a business environment, start making economic-based decisions. Not economic theory, but actual practical economic-based decisions, because you're going to close programs which may be of great value to society, to the students involved, et cetera. My youngest son just graduated it's been almost a year now, from his master's in Edinburgh University, and there were only 14 people in the program.
14 people.
Yeah, from the world who go there. It's one of the top programs in the world, and there's 14 people in there, and it's active, and they do well, and students from that program go on further and do great research and stuff like that. So it's not purely a business thing, and I am no way advocating everything be looked at just by the numbers.
Right.
To ignore the numbers would probably be worse than only looking at the numbers, especially if you don't have people, and again, not economic theorists, but business people saying, I get that looks like that would be a good answer, but have you studied the sort of downstream implications of that answer? Right. So I'm not an advocate of saying we've got 500 people over there, and we got a lot of graduates, and they contribute a lot of money, so that program's safe, and we have 6 over here, so that program's not safe. I don't think that's an intelligent way to approach a problem.
Well, let's take another angle at another whack at this problem, and let's think about it from a technological point of view, and think about the rise of technology-based instruction, especially distance learning, and the way that we have ways of doing it now that actually cost less. So I'm thinking, for example, of Georgia Tech with its master's program in computer science, which is cheaper, both for the institution to offer as well as for people to take. Are we going to see more and more examples of that?
Yes, I do think you're going to see more examples, and there are other examples even in Georgia. They have, I believe it's called eCore, where they took content, and those classes are free or near free to anybody. These are GREs, but they're gen ed classes rather, and everything's free because the faculty, which was compensated, built the textbooks, built the curriculum and everything like that. And so it's all OER, and that was a great way to cut costs as it relates to the content. Now, I promised before, I'm one of those guys who drops a comma and then you think, oh, he forgot about that comma and he's not coming back. Yes, I am. We talked a lot, you and I have talked a lot, and the marketplace talks a lot about textbooks. So textbooks in most circumstances, but not all, are a bit of a folly in the sense that, so I used to work for Follett. I spent 18 years there.
Folly to Follett. That's pretty good.
Sorry, that was an accident. So I spent 18 years at Follett, which is the world's largest textbook seller, right? They don't make any books, they just sell. And they were constantly under pressure because they were the evil vendor, and then they were running the bookstore, and it's commercial, and why is our bookstore commercial, those kind of things. And the reality of the situation is, when you look at costs for what it costs to go to college, if you're spending $1,200 a year on your textbooks, that is of no consequence to the $55,000 a year it's costing you to go to college. So if the number dropped to zero, yeah, sure, you'd have $1,200, not making a big dent in your $55,000. The other piece, and the piece that a lot of people don't like talking about, is the university has real skin in the game when it comes to the textbook store. The textbook companies don't pay the textbook sellers, the bookstore operators, Barnes & Noble or Follett or whoever they are, they pay rent as a percentage of sales. So if your bookstore is doing $20 million a year, your campus is getting X percent, and these percentages run, say, between 8 and 12, in some circumstances 15%. So there is, from a financial perspective, and again, I'm not saying financial only, but from a financial perspective, the campus is pretty happy.
The success of OER could give a real hit to campuses with a textbook company.
You know, that's very interesting. OER is another fun part when you talk about the actual practical view here. So there's been lots of OER projects all over the place, some of them great, some of them good, some of them neither of those things. There was an interesting project that happened 4 or 5 years ago at one of the University of California, or California State campuses, where there was an OER course, and you could have the digital content for free. Or you could go to the bookstore, and they would do a print on demand for you and pay $28 or whatever it was, the cost of printing. And some absurd amount, like 45% of the students bought the book anyway, even though it was free digitally. And Ed Sanford, who used to run higher ed for Gras, told me people need to study studying. And what he meant by that is students, especially the entry levels, the 100, 200 level course students, they like to have physical material for highlights and turning down pages. And yes, they can highlight things digitally. I understand all that. I built these systems. But the point is, when they study, that's how they study. There was another circumstance where DeVry went directly to the publishers and said, we've got 60 zillion students. We're going to guarantee you 100% sell-through, which is a big deal. And I don't want to dominate the conversation about textbook sell-through, but we're going to guarantee you a fixed amount of revenue. You give us the books, and we're going to digitize them, and we're going to do a fixed amount of revenue. And 40% of the students bought the print textbook, not a little POD $28, but the full print textbook, even though the digital books were available for free. So there's a lot that goes on around what the student actually wants, not how much things cost or what the intentions of the creator are, but what the student wants / needs to get the information.
So this sounds like the overall world of book publication. I mean, if I walked around the room right now, I suspect some of you might have a print book in your purse or in your laptop bag. And some of you might have a Kindle e-reader, or you may have a phone completely filled up with ebooks. And with that divided world of ebooks and p-books, as some say, maybe that'll happen with textbooks as well.
It might be. I mean, with ebooks in general, first, they're going to take over the world. No, they were going to take over the world like paperbacks were going to take over the world, and everybody
Right.
else is going to take over the world. And the reality is, the world's too big to take over, or else somebody would have already done it. That's the pragmatic reality to it. So ebooks were a phenomenon. We're going to do everything. We're all going to, all of us in publishing, we're all going to die, and it was all going to be fine. And then it settled in, and right as rain, it's in the 18 to 22%, depending on which genre of print you're talking about,
Right.
in the general trades.
Right.
And that's it. And there will most likely forever stay, because people like print books, and not just old people with beards. People like print books for a variety of reasons. It's much easier to lend them, as an example.
He did this sidelong look at me, because I have a few books, roughly 2,900. But we have, so that's one interesting technological approach to the affordability question. Let me just say that if I could ask people who are in the on the Future Trends Forum on the Shindig platform, if you would like to fire off a question in the chat box, I'll keep an eye out for you. If you have questions that you want to post to the Twitter space, please go ahead. Just use the hashtag FTTE. And those of you who are here in the room, let me just ask, we have a whole bunch of topics to cover that unfold. I mean, we're talking about the future, the business of higher education. We're talking about how technology impacts it. There are a lot of different topics. Let me just ask, if you have a question that you'd like us to tackle, you can just stand up and holler it at us, or you can put it on Twitter, or you could let us continue to mosey our way through our spreadsheet of questions that we already have. Yes, hello, hello. Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Of course, we don't think in that way, right? And we want students to come and get a broad education and worry about the money later. So, any thoughts about how this sort of more calculated way of thinking about it is
They were pretty.
I have a bunch of thoughts, but if you could just shout everybody your name and where you were from. By the way, Carleton also hosts a fantastic economist named Nathan Gras, so please tell him I said hi, who published a book this February called Demographics of Higher Education, which is a fantastic book. It is the book on demographics in higher education. Nothing comes close. It's also short, and he writes very accessibly, which is unusual for an economist. I think the liberal arts sector is fantastic. I've worked in it for many years. It's maybe 4% of American higher education, and it punches way above its weight. People are enormously influential from these very small colleges and universities. And there's a long tradition of it, of not, saying you were here for 4 or 5 years to think and follow your passion and become a better human being, and the money will come. I mean, in fact, there's a lot of studies, you've probably seen some of these, which say that if you graduate from a liberal arts college or university, your first job is less likely to pay as well as if you graduated from a non-liberal arts college university. But down the road, in a few decades, when you switch jobs like most Americans now do, you'll make more money at that second job, in part because you've been trained to switch between domains. You're not just a dental technician, you're a dental technician who studied dance and physics and the history of Wisconsin. Right? What's different now, though, is interesting, is that we have the enormous ramp up of financial aid through student loans. We are now past about the 1.5 trillion amount, and that's really sudden, and this has largely happened in the past 20 years. It's quite extraordinary. Let me just quickly ask for a show of hands. How many of you in the room are still paying off student loans? Well, please keep those hands up, and everybody just look around at that.
That is frightening.
If I asked this question 15 years ago, there would have been fewer hands. Right? So I think the size of that, Jenna, is really pushing the way we think about these things. This really changes it. And I think that's one serious issue. Is that good or bad? I'm simply describing it. The one thing I'm looking ahead to is I'm trying to forecast the first year where we have the first tuition bill that is 6 figures. And I'm looking at perhaps 2024 when this happens. And that may be a milestone that we don't care about, or it may shock us to the bone. But I think in many ways, if you ask a student who graduates and has a median debt of $30,000, do you think money matters? I think they have a pretty tight answer for you. Now, the thing is, we're a very wealthy country. We have our top 10% of our population is extraordinarily wealthy. We still have more billionaires than any other country. It may be that liberal education becomes more and more the way it used to be a century ago, the province of the wealthy, who can afford to take 5 years and study dance and dental technology or whatever. I don't mean that as a cartoon or or to be sarcastic. I think that just might be the sociology of it. That's a very kind of shaggy dog answer to your excellent question. Do you want to add more to that, or talk about Wisconsin schools? Or
So, first, I'm a Wisconsin transplant, so I love Wisconsin, but not born and raised. So, but I can say oofta to my friend across the river there. Regardless of the type of institution, we've been talking about different ways for an individual to fund their education, and we've been talking about how much the cost to run the university is. And there are all sorts of astronomical increases in costs, which are non-instructional costs. Because I don't know how many of y'all in the audience are teaching still, but I have it on pretty good authority. All that money's not going to the instructors. So it's going someplace else. And I know you started teaching again, and it's not going well. Of course, there is a huge sum going to you.
Well,
yeah. It's a different conversation. So there are alternate paths to getting an education. So education has shifted from we go to a red brick building with a flag in the front when we're little, and then we go to ivy-colored buildings on a campus with quads and things like that when we get older. And there are all these alternate paths going on, coding academies, all sorts of vo-tech academies, all sorts of places where they will get you a job with a near guarantee, 90+% rates. Give me $10,000 and in 182 days, you'll be working in that field, pulling down 60 grand or better, whatever it is, right? So I'm not trying to say that that is an educational alternative to a 4-year or 2-year or an Ivy or anything else. What I'm trying to say is for that 18-year-old, especially if it's a first-gen post-high school student, that looks pretty attractive. That looks very attractive.
I want to add one note to this, and that we had for those of you who have questions, hold on for a second, because we have a question that came out online. One further note, think about lifelong learning and the way that people can go back to school more and more often, especially with digital technology. Think about learning episodes where you can keep going back for more and more class. The question we have is from the Shindig Environment, is from Ed Gray. This is a sense of how we use technology. He says, greetings from a Starbucks inside a noisy Target in Oak Park, Illinois. And his question is, what do you think needs to happen for the use of open textbooks and OER to skyrocket? And I assume he means skyrocket in a good way. So he's not getting the rent from the textbook store.
Okay.
And what do you think?
Adoption. The professors,
onward.
that's it. The professors have complete control over this, and I know this in painful detail from my years at Follett. And until more and more professors adopt more and more OER content, you can't move that needle.
Did you hear the UC Riverside story about the calculus textbook? Did you all hear that last year? This was a calculus class which had like 20 or 30 sections, and one professor who was teaching it said, "Oh, there's a great open textbook. I'll sign that." And I signed it. Got called in the carpet by his department and said, "Well, we have an official textbook for this. You should use that print textbook." And he said, "Yeah, but these textbooks are kind of all the same, and I can teach it. This one was free." The chair of the department happened to be one of the authors of the textbook. But he said, objectively decided it was the official textbook. We have more questions coming up. Please, from the back. Yes, hi.
Hold on. Phil Donahue is going to bring you the mic.
It's really good
It's not really Phil Donahue. I was just kidding.
Hi, Marina Gorbis, Institute for the Future. Hi. Back to the conversation about technology and kind of science education versus liberal arts. The conversation in the Valley now and among a lot of technology companies is that so many issues we're facing today in terms of our social media environment and other things are because the people who are developing these apps are narrowly trained and don't have understanding of humanities, philosophy, liberal arts. So everybody's jumping on the bandwagon and putting in ethics courses and other things. And rethinking actually what that education should be. And so I'm really concerned when we're putting all this emphasis on coding and programming and all these other things, where I think more, how should I say, elite universities like Stanford and others are going in a very different direction. They're actually putting in more, and the conversation is actually we need more enlightened technologies who understand history, who understand ethics, who understand philosophy. And so I wonder what you think about that.
I have all kinds of thoughts. And by the way, Marina is at the Institute for the Future, which does fantastic work. And you should all know it and pay attention to them because they're a great, great resource. Marina's book is also awesome. So And by the way, you also had the best microphone in the house. I'm not sure how you did that, but that's pretty good. A couple of thoughts, and some of them are grim and some of them are happy. One grim thought is I think we can still do that and reduce the number of humanities majors out there. The way we do that is shifting humanities programs away from being majors towards being service. So that if I get a degree, say in computer science, I now have to take a program that has a full major with a master's degree and a PhD at the end of it. It's going to be philosophy 101 or philosophy for coding or something else like that, something very powerful. And there's a lot you can do with that. But the philosophers will be focused on that. And it may be that we then fold, say, a bunch of humanities departments into one as a service sector. But you think in many ways like, say, a lot of science classes do that. I mean, I remember taking astronomy in my 5th year as an undergrad. I took astronomy 101 because I read the textbook when I was 13 and I thought it would be easy, and I was right. But because I was deliberately, trying to minimize my exposure. But what if we have more service sectors like that? The really positive thing, hang on for 1 second, the really positive side of this is that the academic humanities are suffering terribly. We're losing enrollment. The non-academic humanities are going great. I mean, think about this right now. If those of you who are older than 30 are still shocked by the fact that television is actually good, that's kind of amazing to think about, right? That there's too much good television. That's the humanities, friends. That's storytelling. And we have movies that still come out. We have books and nonfiction that are tremendously available. And online, this is the best time in human history to be a learner. This is fantastic. So you think of all the resources for someone who wants to just build apps and nothing else. Wow, it's so easy to get them thinking now. But we just don't necessarily make them into a Heidegger major. I think that's an excellent, excellent question. And I have hopes for this. I'm a recovering English professor, and I'm teaching the program right now where I'm inflicting science fiction on my students right now. So I'm on your side for this. We have a question from the person here who has the best mustache in the room. Please. Oh, there was no doubt.
Hi, everybody. I'm Tom Tobin from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And so, no relation, he's not paying me. Yeah. And so your example of the coding program that has the couple of philosophy courses, that would be like Cogito Ergo Sum. Yeah. And
very nice.
But let's examine for a moment the flip side of the coin. And what do you see is the future of some of the forces that are dragging some of this progress backward or retarding it a little bit in terms of legal requirements? I'm thinking about the current uncertain climate about what we do about accessibility when we're talking about reaching out to our students. And so you've got our campus lawyers saying everything must be accessible yesterday. Yeah. And then you've got folks who are in the operational areas thinking about, well, we only have so many resources, people, time, and money. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Do you want to?
Sure. So,
and that.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the. Thank you.
Well, yeah, and it's been the law of the land for 28 years, or pick your length of time.
It was Bush the first, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. And by the way, the person who asked the question from the Starbucks named Ed Gras says to say hi to Tom Tobin. I'm just the messenger here. They could both be spies for all I know. Please go ahead.
So accessibility is a huge issue where technology actually does a fantastic job if people will make the investments. Now, the interesting thing is, as is with most cases with formatting, if you build a thing and then you want to make it accessible, it costs so many X's above if it was just born accessible. And that's a big push. And I do some significant client work in that area around that. So accessibility ties into technology very easily because, again, if properly formatted, the technology can deliver and solve this problem. The retro work is incredibly expensive. So most people, when they get sued, which happens quite often, they plead mea culpa, and then they build a multi-year, here's how we're going to address this and make it all better kind of thing. And the piece I never see as a businessman is, henceforth, before we buy things or build things, we're going to make it accessible in the first place. So what happens is your 5 years are up, you made all those promises, then you get sued again. This is a hypothetical situation because you didn't actually fix the problem, you just fixed the result. That's exactly right. And it's a very simple thing. And you all need to understand, to the vendor community, it's a very simple thing. If you just say, I'm not going to buy it unless. That's all you have to do. And then in 2 budget cycles, whoever makes it will make it that way. Because you said you have to stick to it. I'm not going to buy it unless.
Now, this is the pragmatist. I'd like to be the futurist here for a second, especially since Marina is in the back. I mentioned 2 technologies that might help this. One of them is voice technology, which has just made tremendous strides forward. For example, thinking about Alexa or Siri, or Microsoft really called their agent Cortana. Yeah. That really amazes me. I mean, because Cortana in the games actually goes insane and kills. Anyway,
and your point is,
it's Microsoft, yeah, sure. Or Google Home and everything else. But there's a huge amount of potential for that. You know, all these other issues of design and privacy. Yes, I said, but voice is something that is really powerful for that. And we can do more and more with that. One side of this is if you look at audiobooks and how they've really taken off, a huge market for that is people who have problems with vision. And if you have audiobooks, it's the best solution. It really works. And you'll see more and more of that. Remember large print books, which still exist? We have that kind of solution with audiobooks as well as podcasts. But the second thing is thinking about AI and thinking about ways of having code that can run on software that can make this more accessible. I mean, there are a lot of potential for that, and a lot of business models for that available. We had 2 comments that came in the chat box. I just want to relay them. One came from Tom Hames, longtime friend of the forum, who says that, what is the point of a textbook in the first place? We must deconstruct it. And the other is from Ed, who says, in response to your answer, he's aware of OpenStax et al., but it is still tedious or convincing for most people to find what they want. I'm speaking for others who complain about it.
Yeah, discovery is a huge issue. And this is another one of these circumstances where you have people who are doing a thing, a meritorious thing, trying to get the best content out there at a fair value. And 0 is a pretty good price as far as I'm concerned. But these are not people who are expert in tagging and design and search and retrieval. My first 2 lives were all in pure technology. And we used to say very simply, searching is easy. Chimpanzee sits on a keyboard, a search happens. Finding is hard. Finding relevant is very hard because the user can't find relevant on their own. Your system of tagging and retrieval needs to be designed to be smarter than the user in the sense that the user wasn't there when you built your tags. So I do a lot of library work, and you do things. You used to search for dinosaurs and you'd get no results because the subject heading is paleontology, and you're 9 and you don't know these things and stuff like that. So we had to build library systems that would say, okay, dinosaurs, see also, and so those references come out of that sort of area.
You didn't grasp structured ontologies at 9?
Well, I wasn't the one searching at 9, so because there were dinosaurs when I was 9, so we just had to look out the window.
I can see how this goes. Yeah. So what other questions do we have for the pragmatist or for the futurist? We're able to take a run at a bunch of these. Yes, ma'am. And thank you, by the way, for giving us the correct date for the ADA. I appreciate that. Oh, forget my compliment then completely.
Yeah, I wanted to take that back. If you look at polls today, the confidence in higher education is very down, especially if you're in a red state like Wisconsin or Texas. And it, of course, varies depending on who the people are. How can we rebuild the confidence in the public with respect to higher education?
That's a great question.
Because that comes to funding and everything else.
Yeah,
I think a great deal of that comes from this transparency conversation. If from the university setting, when you're talking to parents or prospective students or the legislature or anybody, if you just keep saying education's important, people are going to say, so is oil, so are jobs. I said oil because you're from Texas. We don't have a lot of oil.
We pump out of 2 million acres, yes.
Yeah, there you go. So if all you say is education is important, so give us money, student, give us money, parent, give us money, lending financial institutions, give us money, the legislature, people are just going to, there isn't any money. So every dollar that they're spending, they're looking at really hard. And if this person comes in and says, give me money and this will be preserved or this will be enhanced, and this is a thing that people can then make different type of money off or save money on, great. I'm a huge fan of education. I've been doing this, like I said, most of my adult life. All 3 of my boys went up to Madison. And they never came back, which is a separate conversation. We'll have that conversation in the bar later. But you can't just tell people, over and over and over again, education is important, give us more money, without explaining what's happening to the money. So from the pragmatist side and from the businessman side, if the institutions want to have a higher level of respect and understanding of the community which is funding them, they're going to have to explain what they're doing with the money.
This is a fantastic question. That's a great answer. And I think transparency will go a long way. We may have a video question coming up, so I'm looking this way to make sure that, so I'm going to start to answer this, but I want to hear from the questioner as well. I think one way would be if we can actually control sticker price. And I'm not sure we can do that yet. It's going to take some time. I think another thing is going to depend on the number of majors we graduate and what fields. If we can convince people that it's worthwhile going to college, I think that's going to take some time. And one thing it's going to take is people in universities, all of you, actually engaging the public. And so we have to remember that we can use that thing. What's that technology called? The one with web pages? The web. We can use that and actually come and talk to people and show what we're doing. We do a lousy job of that right now. We need more public intellectuals. We need more people like Neil deGrasse Tyson explaining the value of this, more people like Bill Nye. And we have lots of great communicators. We have lots of brilliant people. That's why we're academics. I think we can really change that conversation. But it's really not going to be that easy to do. But let me put a pause on that for a second because it's a fantastic question. But we have, I believe this is David Proudfoot. David, can we hear you?
Yes, yeah. Hi, Brian. Thanks for taking my question. I appreciate it. I'm talking to you from the East Coast in Orlando, Florida. Can you hear me okay?
Excellent. Welcome. I can hear you.
All right, wonderful.
Please enjoy the
Oh, thanks. I will. It is dark already, though. I'll give you that. So daylight savings is coming to an end. But I'm a product. My career has been primarily in K-12 education, and there's been a lot of emphasis on accountability for teachers and for schools with school accountability and school improvement initiatives. So my question relates to that in terms of higher ed. Do you see any models in the future that put more emphasis on the institution for successfully teaching students? For example, if a faculty member is poor and it takes them a while to be removed from the position, do you foresee, or maybe there are already, some models that might return a percentage or portion of the credit hours back to the students if there was a lack of instruction? And then, how do we prove that as well, that students don't learn? But do you see any accountability on the schools, or is it all on the students in those models?
Let me jump on that. So that's a fascinating question. Thank you very much. There are a number of things that are dramatically different when you go from K-12 to higher ed, and that's one of them. In K-12, it is completely institutionalized, no pun intended, that the responsibility of learning is on the teacher. It's the teacher's job to make sure the students learn. And then once they go to the university, it's on the student. And the perception in the non-academic world is, how come for 12 years the person in the front of the room with the pointy stick, that's how old I am, was in charge of making sure my child got an education, and then I sent them off to university, and it was free because they don't understand that their taxes pay for the schools. That's a separate problem. And then they went off to university and they didn't learn anything, and they dropped out after 2 years and whatever. And this is another piece of the institutions, the higher education institutions need to explain to people what goes on and how it goes on. And so you have academic freedom, right? So we certainly don't want to tell professors how to teach. That's not how the universe works. But we should explain what we mean by that. It's not a shield to hide behind to say, I'm not doing that on academic freedom grounds. Explain why it's important. Explain how it impacts how a professor does research or instructs and how the students can learn and things like that. I keep coming back to transparency, whether it's pricing or funding or salary, whatever it is they're talking about, because we collectively ask for an awful lot of money. I'm not making no judgment value on whether it's quote unquote worth it or not. I'm just saying it's still an awful lot of money compared to the feeder system, which conceptually to most people is free. Cool. So you have to explain it was free when he was when she was 17, and now she's 18, and it's $45,000 a year, and you won't tell me what's happening, and I don't get to vote on referenda or whatever?
It's a fantastic question, and I'm really, really happy with Michael's answer. I guess looking ahead, I don't see any decline in accountability. I think as people are more and more anxious about higher education, as we get worried about the cost, and also as competing costs appear. That is, in many states, for example, the cost for healthcare, Medicare, Medicaid are accelerating. The costs for pensions are accelerating. We're meanwhile fighting a intercontinental planetary war right now, which does require money. I think the pressure for accountability is just going to escalate. And the more transparent we get, the more we'll see. There's some countervailing forces. Testing has really lost almost all of its oomph because it's so widespread. Hatred of testing, high-stakes testing is so widespread. I think there's a lot of, as well, a lot of dislike of what Tom mentioned. Tom Ames just mentioned in the chat box, the idea of we resist the idea of completely collapsing higher education to a financial transaction. But I think if you're looking at the possibility of sending a kid to a college that's tuition and room and board is $100,000, I think you might want to make sure they get the right instruction in French and the right instruction in petroleum engineering. So I think we'll see more and more accountability, which does make all of our lives more challenging.
And I want to clarify that I am no advocate of making this a purely financial decision.
Yep.
I am quite an advocate for including financial decision-making in the overall decision-making what goes on campus.
No, we had a bunch of good comments, which I don't have time to read through because they're all really good and they're coming really fast. One of them mentioned the interesting idea of copywriting voices for digital books, which is a good idea in some ways and a horrifying idea in others. According to my clock, we're about 1 minute from the end. Which means we have to wrap this up. Here's my idea. See what you think. If you get a chance to give a closing statement, I give a chance to give a closing statement, and then we point to next week, and then we can stick around and talk to these good people who are still here. What do you think?
Sure. And my closing statement I just gave you, which is we can't ignore the need for transparency, and we can't make decisions on campus without an influence from the business side of things. And I'm not talking about the business office on campus because their business training is on campus life.
And that's the pragmatist, speaking very pragmatically, quite seriously. As the futurist, I'll just mention one thing to look ahead a little bit to the far future, say 4 years from now, and thinking about the impact of automation, and that we have to take this very seriously. So just think about this in a couple of ways. Let's just say that automation leads to a downward pressure on employment, that there is underemployment that results. What is the function of the curriculum then? To what extent are we preparing students for a life of, let's call it leisure or downtime? Do we go back to the earlier idea of training the life of the mind for the time when you don't have to be at work? Or do we have to rethink the curriculum for the world after automation? What happens if we take a good hard look at what we teach and learn in terms of what can be automated? And on top of that, how do we incorporate this in class? For example, I'm using Duolingo right now to learn 3 different languages because I clearly need a life. Especially one of the languages is Klingon, so I definitely need to get a life. Just stop it. This is hard language. I mean, Russian is much easier. But Duolingo works right now as a kind of basic AI. It works like a basic out-of-the-box 101 class. And that's what I need, and I'm fine with it. And it cost me a great big $0. So let's go 4 years from now, and let's say there's a Duolingo for other sciences. Things that are objective that you can easily do. Say Duolingo for biology, Duolingo for different engineerings, and maybe for some of the humanities on the objective side. So Duolingo for history, where you do, dates, right? Not the philosophy of something, but dates. What happens to the number of instructors we have? How do we combine that within a class? Do I teach with Duolingo or whatever equivalent that is? And on top of that, what happens to students who come to campus with their helpful AI? How does that interface with your own campus AI? Do you have a campus AI brand? The Buckeye AI, that kind of thing. I'm from the University of Michigan. Do we have a big maize and blue AI, right? How do we do all of this? Does that actually work? What happens to the scope of what we can learn? And above all, as AI and automation gets better and better at stuff, better than we are, right? I mean, already self-driving cars are much less lethal than we are, and they're just getting better, right? As they get better in transcription, as they get better at emotion, how do we think about what it means to live in a world where our inventions have exceeded us? I don't think any other place in the world is better positioned to think about that question than the university and college. I mean, should we ask Hollywood? Should we ask the White House? Should we ask CNN? No. We are the most brilliant people. These are the things we think about. Ask a philosopher, ask an ethicist, a historian, a computer scientist. That's my vision of looking ahead, again, 4 or 5 years out in the future. We have to show a couple of slides for what's happening next. So Tara, if you could please bring up the next slide. But while that's coming up, let me thank everybody for your attention, for your good sense of humor, for putting up with this crazy experiment here with multiple technologies, and for your great questions and thoughts. For those of you who, next week, this is a quick plug for next week, on the forum we have Benjamin Dockstader, who is one of the deepest thinkers of criticism of technology and society. He's also an English instructor in the University of Brussels. We're going to be talking about power and justice and education and technology. And along the way, let's go to the next slide, Tara. We're also going to be starting our book club, where we're reading a fantastic book by Zeynep Tufekci called Twitter and Tear Gas, about mobile devices, social media, and political protest. Possibly the most relevant book we could be reading. So we'll be reading that online. If you're curious, the book is available. And about once a week, we'll read about one chapter, and there's information about that. If you'd like to keep talking with us and keep this conversation going, well, you can buy our books at our bookstore, which would be great. But if you want to keep the conversation going, we have all kinds of social media sites. The forum has populations on Slack, on LinkedIn, on Facebook. You can go to Twitter, where we can have more conversations using the hashtag FTTE. And in the meantime, let me just thank our virtual audience in the forum, who are always wonderful, and we thank the physical audience here. And also let me thank the awesome AV crew who made all this happen. Bravo!